Welcome to today's explainer. Look, today we're taking a deeply empathetic but rigorously structured look at something that, quite frankly, shatters lives. We're going to dive into the complex mechanics of sudden relationship breakdowns when they happen under intense, relentless stress. If you've ever had the ground just completely fall out from under you without any warning whatsoever, well, this analysis is specifically for you. We're going to carefully deconstruct the underlying psychology behind all of this so you can actually make sense of the chaos and, more importantly, begin to rebuild. So here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We're going to start with the anatomy of sudden shock, followed by surviving the relentless siege. After that, we'll look at sabotage and emotional imprinting, move right into reclaiming your self-worth, and finally, we'll wrap up with building the architecture of boundaries. Let's get started. Section 1. The anatomy of sudden shock, when the narrative collapses. So we really have to ask an analytical question right off the bat. How exactly does the human mind process the abrupt collapse of its most intimate narrative? Think about it. When a partner cuts contact overnight and suddenly acts like you literally never existed, you don't just experience standard sadness, you experience what psychologists call identity shock and attachment whiplash. Your entire emotional system just goes into an absolute freefall. Why? Because it literally cannot process the sheer speed of the change. It's too fast. This kind of sudden trauma severely violates our fundamental human need for transition, for context, and for closure. You see, you didn't just lose a person in this scenario. You lost the entire version of yourself that you were when you were with them. Now, when a relationship buckles under impossible conditions, it completely shatters your reality. It forces your mind into this immediate, incredibly painful recalibration. It's like a giant puzzle being flipped off a table. But here is the absolutely critical psychological takeaway that you need to internalize right now. Their sudden, impulsive disappearance is a reflection of their overwhelmed emotional capacity. It is not a reflection of your worth. I really want to emphasize that. They didn't disappear because they were somehow stronger than you or because you were inadequate in some way. No, they disappeared because they were desperately trying to escape the heavy weight of an environment that they simply lacked the tools to handle. Moving on to Section 2, Surviving the Relentless Siege. A 21-day breakdown. We can actually trace this specific type of relational decay through a measurable 21-day timeline of a psychological siege. It's fascinating, really. Day 1 marks the shift into a total defensive posture. Everyone's on guard. By day 7, you start seeing the first structural fractures appear as the tension inevitably rises. Then we hit day 14, which brings the peak assault. This is where your emotional and physical reserves are simultaneously and ruthlessly drawn down. By day 21, the siege typically ends in full isolation. The collective burden here acts as a massive accelerant. It literally compresses what would normally be months and months of standard relationship friction into a completely unsurvivable 21-day pressure cooker. It's a stress test that absolutely no connection is naturally designed to withstand. And by the time we hit day 21, the emotional tank hits absolute zero, just zero. Because pouring absolutely everything you have into basic psychological and physical survival leaves you with exactly zero bandwidth for patience, for warmth, or for connection with your partner. The capacity for human care is wonderful, but it is not infinite. When a siege like this drains it completely dry, there is just nothing left to give, no matter how much genuine love previously existed in that relationship. This kind of profound depletion leads to a really severe distortion of perception. It essentially pits paranoia directly against reality. Now, hypervigilance is a necessary life-saving tool, right? It protects you on a literal battlefield. But when you are stuck in a high-conflict emotional environment, that exact same hypervigilance becomes incredibly corrosive inside a relationship. You start reading grave danger into entirely neutral signals. The very person who is supposed to be your safe harbor is suddenly turned into a perceived threat by your own exhausted, overworked nervous system. And that brings us to a really tragic core paradox. The very behaviors that kept you alive during the psychological siege, things like extreme guardedness, emotional shutdown, strategic silence, are precisely the behaviors that actively accelerate the decay of your relationship. The defense mechanisms you built for the battle literally become walls in the bedroom. You end up caught in this impossible contradiction, fighting an external enemy while helplessly watching your own inner world just unravel before your eyes. Section 3. Sabotage and emotional imprinting. I want to pose a theoretically grounded question here, just to challenge some of our basic assumptions about how breakups happen. Did your partner truly make an independent choice to leave, or were they aggressively pulled away? We really have to critically analyze whether their sudden departure was a genuine reflection of their true desires, or if it was the direct result of a carefully manipulated, high-pressure emotional environment orchestrated by a third party. It completely changes how we view the event. Let's dissect a pretty common scenario to understand this better. Imagine a stranger boldly approaching a couple on a gym floor. On the surface, the stranger flirts, and eventually the partner leaves with them. Simple enough, right? Actually, no. The psychological reality operating underneath that scenario is entirely different. This isn't just a simple flirtation victory for the stranger. It's a calculated dominance play, and it's a severe boundary test. When a partner leaves in a scenario like this, it does not mean they were magically stolen. What it does is expose pre-existing cracks and deep emotional dissatisfaction that were already festering under the surface. The event on the gym floor didn't create the problem. It simply illuminated the pre-existing instability of the relationship. But what happens when you introduce extreme fear or environmental chaos into the mix? This is where we enter the concept of emotional imprinting. When a person is severely panicked or overwhelmed, their nervous system can actually rewire itself in a single split second. They will rapidly bond to whoever steps in as a symbol of protection. They'll mistakenly identify the nearest source of safety as genuine love. In these incredibly intense scenarios, you didn't lose them to a quote-unquote better person. You lost them to their own adrenaline and their basic biological survival instinct. Understanding that completely reframes why a targeted partner flips so fast under third-party sabotage. They are being hit with overwhelming attention, shock, and validation conflict. Then, you add in the immense social pressure of a coordinated attack and the sheer speed of the manipulation, and guess what? All logic is entirely bypassed. Sudden abandonment in this specific context is a glaring sign of coercive, high-speed influence. Your relationship wasn't defeated in a fair fight. It was ambushed. Section 4. Reclaiming your self-worth from the rubble. So, you are now standing in the rubble, processing an incredibly complex dual loss. You survived the enemy, yes, but you lost the connection. This specific type of burnout grief is completely valid, and frankly, it's necessary to feel. But it is absolutely vital to deeply reframe this experience. This loss was a failure of impossible conditions that no relationship was ever meant to withstand. It was absolutely not a personal failure on your part, nor does it point to any lack of your core character. We really must forcefully shift the internal narrative away from feeling inadequate. Listen to this. A breakup doesn't actually destroy your worth. It simply exposes where you were outsourcing your validation. Think about that for a second. When the ground falls out from under you, you realize you placed your foundational value in someone else's hands. True self-worth must be deliberately, internally re-anchored. Your essential value as a human being is never ever derived from being chosen by someone else. So how do we fix it? Here is a clear, actionable guide to stabilize your heart. Step 1. You need to fully acknowledge the trauma of the shock without judging yourself for the pain. Just let it be what it is. Step 2, and I'd argue this is the absolute core of the entire process. Separate their impulsive choice from your intrinsic worth. Their sudden departure entirely reflects their emotional capacity under pressure, not your quality. Step 3 is to rebuild your narrative, moving yourself from victim to survivor. And finally, Step 4, fiercely reclaim your emotional space. Section 5. The architecture of boundaries. To build a resilient future, we really have to look at the structural integrity of relationships. Weak boundaries invite constant instability. They practically hold the front door wide open, allowing manipulation, external threats, and blatant disrespect to just slip right in through the cracks. Strong boundaries, on the other hand, operate as intentional, fiercely protected agreements. They create total clarity, profound safety, and deep trust. And they aren't about controlling your partner at all. They are about intentionally protecting the emotional space of the relationship so that genuine love can actually thrive. You must proactively construct specific infrastructure across every domain of your life. We're talking about emotional boundaries to protect your mental energy, physical and sexual boundaries to ensure bodily autonomy, and social, digital, and lifestyle boundaries to safeguard your shared life from external sabotage. Each one of these protects a distinctly different flank of your connection. Once again, these aren't walls built out of fear to keep people out. They are vital durability protocols that make authentic, long-term connection possible long before the next siege ever arrives. Because making it through the chaos and the sheer exhaustion of that 21-day siege is not the finish line. Surviving is just the starting block. It's time to step out of the rubble and deeply invest in the hard-earned wisdom you've gained.
The person who emerges from this trauma is not the same person who entered it. You are sharper now, you are far wiser, and you are highly attuned to the dynamics of respect and true connection.
And let me reassure you directly with absolute certainty. Your heroic identity is entirely intact. If your nervous system forced you to run from an overwhelmingly chaotic situation, or if you froze under the massive pressure of the siege, that wasn't weakness. It was a biological overload. The core of who you are, your brilliant intelligence, your genuine kindness, your limitless potential, none of that was erased by their departure. Your intrinsic value was never truly lost. You remain completely whole. We'll conclude this explainer with a provocative but hopefully empowering mandate. The psychological breakdown we just analyzed proved one undeniable fact. The siege tested your environmental conditions, but it did not break your character. You survived a massive, coordinated emotional attack. So the ultimate question is, what will you choose to build on this newly tested ground? Take this knowledge, protect your newly reclaimed space, and build a future and a relationship completely worthy of your survival. Thank you so much for exploring this with me today. Keep moving forward.